I'm going to go through the process here. Some of it's rather formal in this section of the meeting, and if you bear with me through that, we appreciate it. The President reports that the meeting has been called pursuant to a notice of meeting in accordance with the bylaws. It was ordered that a copy of the notice be appended to the minutes of the meeting. So, we're delighted to have Pat Llodra here this morning to give us a state of the town address. Everybody knows Pat, I think, so she doesn't deserve any special introduction from me. But
I'm on?
yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me apologize for my running in late. I actually was here. Well, a couple of things happened this morning. First of all, I went to Rock Ridge. So that was the start of my day. So, and I was on time, like, oh, God, no one's here but me. So then I realized, of course, I was in the wrong place. So I'm very happy to be here, but I arrived thinking that I'm just going to hang out and have breakfast, and how lovely that is to start my work week, just having breakfast with some great people. I had no idea I was the speaker. So when I learned that, and that happens, you know, stuff happens. So when I learned that, I ran back to the office to get the presentation that I just did for the Methodist men's group. And of course the printer wouldn't work. How could this happen all in one day? So here I am. So a little scramble, sorry. I would have been spectacularly well prepared for you with comments that are really appropriate and relevant to who you are. So I hope that this big picture that I'm going to give you is helpful, informative, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So I always start talking about the state of the town with kind of that bigger picture of who I am and why the kind of grand themes that were in place when I began my role as First Selectman that have persisted throughout this 7 and some years. And some of them have been very odd years. So first of all, I want to talk about financial discipline. And I know as business people that's something that you struggle with all the time. So in terms of running the town, there's financial disciplines that I put into place 7.5 years ago that persist to this day that I think are solid financial principles that I hope continue into the future. It is, I think, our pathway to regaining that sense of vitality and really thriving as a community. Clearly, we're struggling right now, clearly. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the financial disciplines really talk about fund balance, debt, and pay-as-you-go for capital projects. So those 3 things are very important. And it's not that the people prior to me, the First Selectman prior to me, didn't pay attention to those, but times were different. Remember the boom years of the 90s and the 2000s, the first decade in 2000, we grew by 25%. We had people coming in, young families, a lot of kids, school pressure for sure, but there was also the sense of dynamics in our community that's very different than who we are today. So I recognized that when I took over that we were, of course, I took over at the very time that the recession hit. Bad timing on my part, but you know, again, the challenge is not beyond us, and I really feel confident about our community. So in terms of fund balance, what had been happening is that our fund balance was robust, but it was okay. But we were confident that new money was always coming in because we were growing. So it was okay for the Legislative Council, and I was a member of the council for 4 years before I became First Selectman. It was okay to take some money out of our savings account and apply it to taxes so that the taxpayers didn't bear the full weight of a tax increase. So I'm not even sure if taxpayers knew that the Legislative Council was paying down some of the taxes so that we didn't have to levy the whole burden onto the taxpayer. And it was a gift to all of us that are taxpayers, but it also created that false sense of what our economy really was and the cost to run our community. Because what happened, the recession hit, our bond rating was really being threatened because we had allowed our fund balance to diminish beyond what is a reasonable savings account for a municipality. So our fund balance should be at about 10% to 12%. 12% is the average for municipalities of our size and with our bond rating. We were down to 6%. So that was the danger. So in one of the first conversations I had with the bond ratings, it was, you know, you really got to get your ship in order here. So we made a commitment to stop doing that. So we said, okay, it's going to take us 2 years to wean ourselves off that. Otherwise, the impact on taxpayers would have been so substantial in that first year, it would not have been tolerable. So it took us a couple of years to wean ourselves off that, but we have totally not done that for 4 years, which has resulted in some very positive things in terms of finances for our community. Our fund balance is now, I think, is greater than 10%. Which is very positive. And that really shows, you know, that financial discipline is really important when you're talking about a bond rating. And bond rating for a municipality is as important as your personal credit rating, as your business credit rating. It is our credit rating, and that's really important that we preserve that high bond rating. So in terms of debt, you know, one of the, I always say to people, you know, I'm very Republican, lowercase r, in my discipline in terms of debt, small government. I mean, I really believe those things. I think that we ought to be paying attention to how much we owe people, and that we should never let our debt be greater than our capacity to pay those bills. And we were marginalized. We were getting to that point where we were paying a debt ratio of greater than 10%, 10% of our operating budget. So that meant every year, right off the top, $10 million we're going to pay a bill. We weren't getting any benefit from that, other than a prior commitment had been made to some kind of a capital project or whatever it was made. So my feeling was that that's too much. A 10% debt ratio was okay in terms of the rating agencies, but it wasn't okay in terms of my perspective of how to be a good fiscal hawk for our community. So we've slowly gotten that debt ratio down. We're down to about 8% now, which is really, I'm much more comfortable at 8% than I was at 10%. And the last of the financial disciplines is to pay as you go. I really think that paying as you go is really a critical attribute of good management. I know it's what you must practice when you run your households. You don't always go out to the bank and borrow something to pay off a capital debt. You might know that, gee, you know, in a couple of years I am going to need a new roof. So let me start putting aside some money for that roof now. Or maybe in your business you do the same thing. You know you have a capital expense coming up in a couple of years. So save ahead for some of those things. So I'm a policy kind of person. It probably comes from my educator head. I'd like to write it down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because it holds me accountable for that, and it holds others accountable too. So the policy is 0.3% of every annual budget gets set aside for what we call capital non-recurring. So capital non-recurring is things that don't recur every year, and they're anticipated capital expenses. So we save ahead. I'd like to increase that to 0.5%, but that's a little bit of a stretch right now. So roads. That's a huge issue as a pay-as-you-go item. For the past couple of years, we've had to bond $1 million a year to try to catch up with our road challenges. During the worst parts of the recession, we were not able to fund road capital repair at the level that we should have funded it. So we had to bond it, which means that we're paying off what we borrowed to fix roads for the next 20 years, and those same roads that we fixed under a borrowed fund are going to need to be redone within that 20 years. I mean, that's why you don't ever want to bond for roads. But we were facing such a desperate circumstance in the condition of the roads, we had to bond $1 million. So our pledge was to do that for 3 years. This is the last of the 3 years that we're asking to bond $1 million. At the same time, we're building our operational budget up to $1.7 million. So it gives us a total fund for our roads of $2.7 million, which is an extraordinary amount of money. But we have 270 miles of road, 270 miles. And we do about 10 miles a year, 10, 15 miles a year is all you can do for that much money. It's an extraordinary expense. So the impact of the financial policies is that our bond rating is for Standard & Poor's is AAA, and for Moody's is AA1, so one click below AAA for Moody's. The importance of that I don't want you to think we always want to chase a bond rating. That's not the issue. It's not the report card. It's the fact that when you have a high bond rating, you can borrow money at the best possible rate. So that's why you do that. So we're a town that borrows money a lot. Every year we borrow millions of dollars because we're always, which is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. We're always investing in our community. So when we borrow money, when we borrow those millions of dollars, it's to build a new community center or a senior center or to fix roads or a new police station. That borrowed money is not operational. It's not to pay salaries. It's not to pay the fuel bill. It's to invest in bricks and mortar, capital costs for our community. So the bond rating agencies think of that as very positive, but they also want that to be manageable. So what the very good thing about practicing, one of the very good things about practicing all those strong financial practices also is that we continue to get a rating from our agencies that particularly note strong financial practices. That's a category in the rating agencies. So we are rewarded for having those strong fiscal policies. So we've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by having a high bond rating. So we chase the bond rating by fixing our fund balance, by reducing our debt, by reducing what we borrow annually to get that ratio at a more appropriate level. The benefit of that is that we have an increased bond rating, we can borrow at a better rate, and we get real credibility. When we go out into the bond market to sell those bonds, there's a lot of competition for bonds that come from Newtown because we have that credibility. So what's happened to our grand list over time? It's been a challenge. We've grown every year, which is a good thing. Even, let me see, one year, 2009, was the only year that our absolute net grand list did not grow. It decreased that year by 0.08%. A very small decrease, but it did tick back, and that was the lowest part of the recession. We also experienced, as you know, some challenges with our reval, and we're going through a reval now. We did a revaluation of the assets of the community at the very time when the market was at its lowest possible level. So that was very harmful in terms of the valuing of our grand list. Since that, our grand list has grown, let me see, in 2010, 0.42%, 2011, 0.66, then we had a reval year, you can't really manage that, there's no comparative for that. 2013, 0.54, 2014, 0.70, 0.7, and then 2015, 0.3%. So slow growth. It's been really, really challenging, and that is that's our present, and I think that's our immediate future. Our grand list breakdown. We have, and this is the story of Newtown. Most of our grand list is residential property. So that means that we bear, as homeowners in our community, we bear most of the burden of raising the taxes that are needed to run this community. So the contribution of commercial industrial is at about 8%. I think we ought to be at 14%. It's quite a difference. It's a huge gap, and that's a huge challenge. I don't know how we're going to get there. Well, I do know how, but it's going to be very, very slow. It has to be purposeful. It has to be intentional. We have to be careful, because at the same time, we don't want to erode the core values of our community. So I'm certain that you can all think of towns that were too aggressive in their pursuit of commercial industrial growth, and actually ended up looking not like the town they were when they started that journey, and lost some of that core value, which speaks to why we are all here. So it's always finding that balance. We need to grow in terms of the contribution from non-residential taxes, but we don't want to erode the values that we have as a primarily residential community, such that we in fact harm the very people that are working hard to get us there. So it's a real challenge, and that speaks to what kinds of zoning should we have? What should we allow into our community? What kinds of commerce? What kinds of industry? What should it look like? We have these struggles all the time. The struggle, do we want drive-thrus? Do we want a McDonald's? Do we want big box stores? The answers typically have been no to those questions. Now, I don't know if they'll continue to be no. You know, there was this extraordinary, for me, extraordinary kind of event with planning and zoning that a particular area by exit 10, 10 is that? Yes, 10 in the center of town, was that particular very small described area was allowed now to have a drive-through. So that might be cracking the code. I don't know. I don't know if that's a huge message to the world that we're starting to look at ourselves differently. But it is a significant change from what's transpired in the past. So that's kind of what we're going to be facing. So we have, let me see, the exact number, 78% of our total grand list is all residential. So again, it's too high for us to bear because the tax burden is beyond what is manageable for most individual property owners as well as businesses, and it really contributes to your burdens as well. So short-term, long-term goals, again, I've told you, I think we need to be at 14% contribution in our grand list in order for us to ease the tax burden significantly. So I can tell you that's what, maybe 5 or 6 plazas the size of Sand Hill. I mean, that's really what it means in practical terms. So something like that, we have to be very careful not to be too aggressive and not to go too fast in pursuit of that. But we also have 25% of our land area that's still available for development. So we are not fully built out. The town that we're most comparable to in terms of what our future might look like is Trumbull. But Trumbull is fully built out. There's no new land in Trumbull to develop. It's fully accounted for. So any new business they have there is taking down an old business, building a new business, or using land that was previously residential and now determined to be commercial industrial. So Trumbull's grand list has about 13% from commercial industrial. So we're pretty typical. We also, our population is now at 28,000. In a fully built out state will be at 33. So that's what the demographers anticipate. So that's new growth. So I often get a question about what do I see in terms of that demographic shift? How are we changing? Do we have a lot of elderly people moving out, younger people moving in? What do we look like? The answer is both mixed. We certainly are losing some of our senior residents because the cost of living in Connecticut, in New England, is too high. It's not in Newtown, it's in Connecticut, it's in New England that the cost of living is too high, unless you go pretty far north of New England. So we're losing certainly some of our senior residents, and that's, you know, that's a sadness for me because I think we're culturally richer, ethically, morally richer when we have a diversity of ages and lifestyles. So I think we want to pay attention to that we're losing some of our senior residents. So one of the, you know, we've done several things, but one of the things that I always want people to know is that I think we're the second most generous community in the state of Connecticut in terms of tax mitigation for elderly persons, so for seniors. So right now we spend $1.6 million a year on tax mitigation for senior citizens that qualify. There has to be a need, it's needs-based. So that's an effort to keep those seniors here. The only town that we can find that exceeds that is Reading, and Reading I think is at 1.9 million, so proportional. So we're very, very generous, and I'd like us to continue that generosity. We also need to respect and acknowledge their needs in terms of lifestyle. There's no question in my mind that we need a new senior center. I think we've needed that for a long time. Those of you who are familiar with that center would recognize its deficits. It's not a place that speaks to who seniors are today. It's not particularly warm and inviting. It wasn't designed with that in mind when it was created, those many years ago, 50 or so years ago. It must have been, I think it was in the 70s when that building was built. So we need to do something, and hopefully the time is now. So let me talk a little bit about budget history. Again, slow growth. The challenge we have with the budget, I don't want to feel defensive about the town budget, but I often do, because, you know, with even though our population continues to grow a little bit, it's not growing in terms of school children. It's growing in terms of families without children. It's growing, think of the age-restricted communities that we have. Those are not, those populations don't, those families don't contribute school children. The problem that we have is that the needs of the town they don't go away whether our population goes up or down. We still have 275 miles of road that we have to do, and we have to maintain that road. There's the one thing we all have in common. We all don't use the schools. We all don't go to the same church. We all don't go to the library. We all don't go to the Edmond Town Hall to go to the movies. We all drive on these roads. So it's something that we have in common that we have to keep a commitment for. So whether our population grows by leaps and bounds or grows incrementally as it is now, it doesn't reduce the pressure on the town to get the damn roads fixed. You know, we have to do that. It also means that we still have to do the senior center, we still have to do a police station, we still have to do all those things. So the pressure we have now with the town budget is that needs to grow incrementally. If we don't continue to grow that budget, we're not going to be able to fix the road, build a senior center, fix the police station. We're not going to be able to do those things. And we're always used as a counterbalance with the school budget, and I'm not an apologist for the school budget at all, but I can tell you that I think that the core value of our community is excellent education. That is what's going to contribute to our success in the future. So we can't compromise that either. So I can't speak to that budget, and I'm as stressed as everybody else about the fact that our school population continues to decline at the rate that it's declining. But that's the case all over Connecticut. Our country, as a matter of fact, is experiencing the lowest growth in 25 years. That's an extraordinary statistic. We're growing at the slowest rate in 25 years. So you have to go back 25 years ago to find a period of time when we've had as many new births and immigrant population as there are today. So our population is not growing. Now you're going to hear that Danbury's growing. Sure, some of our cities are growing with more immigrant population, and the cities will be facing those challenges. Danbury, here's one of the oddities we have in the state of Connecticut. Danbury is probably going to be talking about building a school. And we struggled, as you know, to figure out if we should close the school. So the fact is that we have these territorial boundaries, these political boundaries that separate towns and cities across Connecticut, unlike some other areas of the country, because what I should be able to do is call Mark Boughton and say, hey, we've got 14 empty classrooms. Send us a bunch of kids. We're happy to educate Danbury kids. Just fill up our classrooms. And let that money follow those kids to Newtown. So that's a reasonable way to run the store, but that is not what's going to happen in Connecticut because we can't seem to break through that kind of thinking. So the most recent budget increase, 0.9% was the actual increase. Again, in order for us to meet our needs, we're cannibalizing our own programs. I have to go back to the departments and say, we can't afford anything more than X. You want Y, can't have it, I'm sorry. In order for us to do what we have to do, I have to take away from what our departments need. So it's been and this year is going to be horrible. You've already, we learned over the, a Merry Christmas present to me that that the Office of Policy and Management has determined that Newtown is going to lose $186,000 on a ZCS grant and $304,000 in our LoCIP money. So that means that I start the day today, in addition to being late, going to the wrong place, not having a document, that I'm starting the week with $500,000, with a $500,000 loss. So current, not next year. Next year, I'm already nervous about. That's current. That's money that we built this budget on, anticipated to come. Found out Tuesday, not happening. So the state has a deficit that is extraordinary, and I think that the deficit has to be accommodated in some way. I don't know what the answer is, and I think it's going to be painful, and we're all going to share in that pain. I need to tell you some good news. Okay, our demographics, I talked to you a little bit about that. Our population has increased 5% in the past 6 years. We now stand at 28,331. Little snippet of good news, we have 32 children that new to our community that are enrollees at Sandy Hook School, in addition to the population, of course, that came back from Chalk Hill. So building that's kind of an affirmation and I think an excitement. And the school, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. I know some of you have because some of you were in the tours that I led. But it's a wonderful place, and I think is a message to the world that we are open, not just for business, but we're open as a community, as a community with heart. And we want to bring you all here and share in how wonderful this is and how great this new school is. 34% of our population is older than the age of 50. 15% is 65 or older. The senior population continues to increase in proportion to the population of the town. Even though we're losing some of our senior population, the proportion continues to increase. So I think we're up to 20% or so of our senior population is 60 or above. School enrollment continues to decline and will decline until 2023. That's how serious that is. So we're going to lose probably another 1,000 students in our schools between now and 2023. So it's a huge challenge that we're going to have to manage 7 school buildings, the cost of 7 school buildings with such a low enrollment. 94% of all the housing in Newtown is single unit structure. It's a challenge for us. We are going to be pressed for more 830G developments. We've been able to keep those at bay a little bit. That's the income adjusted housing. So all the communities around us have faced that challenge. We've not had that as direct as I anticipate coming within the next couple of months. So I think that we're going to see more pressure in that, and we need to get ahead of it. We need to be smart in that. We need to have, we need to engage that issue in a way that allows us to apply our zoning regulations. I mean, that's one of the problems with the 830G developments is that they don't have to comply with any of our zoning standards. Setbacks and all of that don't apply. We can't apply that. So if we want to continue to look kind of the way we look, we have to be smart about what kind of housing we plan. We have 4 age-restricted communities. I don't think we need any more. 2 proposed developments have affordable units. Now, affordability is different than 830G. So our affordability units are the controls that we've created in our affordability regulations. So the two developments that are likely to go forward pretty quickly, the one in Sandy Hook and the one at Exit 9, both have some designated affordability components, which is the right thing for us to do. State regs call for each municipality to have 10% of housing stock that's affordable. We don't even quite make 2%. We're at 1.9. So we need to get to 2% even to ask to be on a wait list, you know, to be an abeyance. We're looking at more cluster type housing, better, smarter use of land. I think that's what the millennials tell us. That they are not interested particularly in the lifestyle that my generation pursued, which is a 3,000 square foot house with a couple of acres and a lot of space and lots of stuff to take care of and be accountable for. Millennials are telling us that no, that's not the lifestyle that they're choosing. They're choosing smaller spaces, less land, more walkability, more bikeability. So we have to be smart in the way we develop, continue to develop our community. And you're going to see that in Hollyville more than anything, I think. That's the next area that we're likely to pay significant attention to, such as we did with Sandy Hook. So, and we're still developing Sandy Hook, of course, along those same kind of themes. So Fairfield Hill, or economic development, we have Newtown Borough Central Business District, Hollyville, South Main Street, Sandy Hook Village, Botsford, and Dodgingtown. We really have identified those as separate economic areas of our community. Each of those is a village in and of itself with its own economy and its own ability to craft a future around local economic growth that speaks to what those communities are like. Sandy Hook, again, is the best example. So if we take kind of all that effort we put into Sandy Hook over the past 10 years and apply it to Hollyville, it shouldn't look like Sandy Hook because Hollyville is not Sandy Hook. Hollyville is Hollyville. So we'll be developing Hollyville in accordance with what the attributes of that community should be. And also then looking at those same economic areas with some potential that kind of represent the village that it is. So if you think again of the borough and how that's starting to really come around Lexington Village and how that kind of is changing the interior of that community, that's kind of that economic growth. Slow going, I can tell you. It's painful. Fairfield Hills, finally, I think making some progress there. I shouldn't say finally, we actually, Crystal, I see in the back of the room here, we counted out the other day, we've actually removed 15 buildings at Fairfield Hills. So, but it's happened over such a long period of time, I think you're probably surprised by that number. 15 buildings are not there today that were there when we took possession of that property some, 12 years ago. So that's a pretty remarkable progress, but again, it's been very expensive. I think we probably, from our own money, have spent maybe $30 or $40 million over that period of time. So you can imagine what we could have accomplished with that money. However, I think Fairfield Hills is the greatest gift to our community and will be that forever. So it has become the civic, social, cultural center of our community, not the commercial center. I know that was the original thinking, that Fairfield Hills that would develop, there would be a driving commerce in Fairfield Hills and that it would be a boon to our local grand list. Well, that's not what's happened. But I say, well, does it really matter where the economic growth is? Does it matter if it's Hollyville or Sandy Hook or Dodgington? It all contributes to the grand list. It doesn't have to be at Fairfield Hills because the community has clearly spoken. Fairfield Hills would be the place where they want to walk their dogs and they want to walk their children. They want to walk on our beautiful trails. They want to go to NYA. They want to go to the community center. The senior center will be there. Ambulance Garage is now there. Parent Connection is there. The Center for Support and Wellness. Those are not commercially viable organizations. They are civic and social. So that's what the community has determined is our future, and I think that's okay. I think we need to be okay with that and say, let's celebrate this. And this is our Central Park. And for those of you, and Ruby Johnson, bless her, who passed away a couple of years ago, really fought that good fight, saying Fairfield Hills should be our Central Park, not our corporate park. And really, I don't think she had much of an audience then, but I think somehow she's in control now because that's certainly the direction that we're going in. So, let me see. Projects and possibilities. Again, police station. I know that for those of us that are in the town all the time, we tend not to even look at the building. It's just kind of there. We don't really pay attention to it. I would suggest to you at some point, you kind of drive in the back in the driveway and look at that building. That is an embarrassment for our community. The siding continues to fall off. We need to put it back on kind of with glue and sticks and hammers and nails and whatever we can to keep the building. Structurally, the building is fine. It's just that aesthetically, it's pretty horrible. It was built, as you know, as the Sibley building. It sold tractors, and it did very well. It sold a lot of tractors. It was never designed to be a police station. It doesn't serve that function well. We need to honor the work that our police department does by giving them a facility that speaks to the quality of their work. That building does not. So the challenge, however, when we build that building, a building for the police stations, we also need to find offices for Park and Rec because they're also in that building. Our social services are also in that building, and our dispatch center. So that building actually serves 4 critical functions for our community. So we have a big challenge right ahead of us, how we're going to figure that out. Permanent memorial. I think that we've had this wonderful commission, this Permanent Memorial Commission, led by Kyle Liddy, that is, I think, coming to closure on the selection of where. Their job was to figure out where, should we have a permanent memorial? Their answer is yes to that. Where should it be? They're figuring that out now. I think we'll know that within a very short period of time. And third, how are we gonna, what is it? What's the nature of it? And then, how are we gonna find it? So I think those, I think we're gonna see in 2017 answers to all 4 of those questions. So again, that's very significant for us. I mean, the big pieces that we had to respond to after our horrible tragedy at Sandy Hook were, what are we going to do about the school? How are we going to address that? So we did that, and we also now have to figure out how we're going to do, how we're going to memorialize this horrible thing that happened to us. There's no doubt that it has changed us in some ways that we'll never recover from, because it's now integrated into who we are. And we should not go past it in terms of forgetting this happened to us. It happened to you as business owners, it happened to you as residents, it happened to all of us as leaders. So it's a reality that we deal with. But there's also, people say there's also, in some ways, has made us a better place, and that we're a little kinder, we're a little less, we're a little more reluctant to be unkind to each other, a little bit more careful with how we treat each other. I hope that that's true. I think that that certainly is my reality. But I'm more hesitant now to strike out and to be harsh with someone because somehow that softens you. When you have a horrible tragedy like that, it strips you of all that artifice, all that stuff that really doesn't matter at all. And I think that for many of us, we're still there, and I hope we remain there. I think we need to remain that humble, hurt population, because I think it makes us a better population. It doesn't harm us in ways that are handicap us. It helps us to be our real selves. So that's kind of my thinking on that. So that's the whole thing. So I'm happy to answer questions. Taxes. Anyone asking about taxes? No? Thank you.